Today's reading is from James 1 verses 2 to 4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything.
Good morning. It's lovely to be joining the service today. My name is Lynette Teagle, and some of you might not know me, but my husband Peter and I have been part of the leadership team in Northway, but we've actually been part of HBC for the last 14 years. Of course, you may be a bit more familiar with our children. Sam was leading the prayer a little bit earlier on, and Maddie is one of the youth and is helping me with this video. Well, we're now well into spring, and with the weather as glorious as it's been the last few days, it's difficult not to think about the summer. And of course, this year, there are lots of questions about whether summer holidays can happen in the way that they normally do. Maybe like me, you've dragged out the old photo albums, or Facebook has been reminding you of old memories. And for us, certainly as a family, one of the most memorable holidays that we had was about 11 years ago when we decided to take the kids hiking in the Lake District. And I'm sure many of you will know how easy it is to start a climb. And the snacks were all packed, and everyone was geared up with walking shoes and hiking poles and backpacks. But it didn't take long before we all started getting tired. And then the kids, who were 13, 11, and 6 at the time, started to ask, how long more do we have to walk? How far do we really have to go? And at first we could keep saying, just wait a bit more. We can have a picnic at the top. The view will be fantastic. But of course, once you get to the top, you have to do the same trek all the way back down again. And with Harterfell, which was where we were, the path down is a gravel path, and it was slippery and difficult, especially for tired legs. All the snacks had been eaten, and in the end, the only incentive to keep us going was the promise of ice creams and a cream tea when we got to the bottom. Because it's really tough, isn't it? When you've been through what you think is the difficult bit, when you find out there's a load more difficulty to come. And I wonder if some of us feel like this at this point in lockdown, when it's day 60. When it first began, perhaps not surprisingly, most people said they were doing okay. Shopping was a bit more complicated, but some of us missed seeing people. But on the whole, we thought we were doing fine. Fast forward a few weeks and things may not be feeling so good. We miss family and friends. We may miss physical contact. Doing things on screen is tiring and sometimes feels a strain. And for some of us, the virus has really hit us hard, and we've been ill, or loved ones have been unwell. Some of us have lost some really precious people in our lives, and we may feel that we are treading a fine line indeed when it comes to surviving from day to day. So it feels really appropriate this morning to be thinking about what it means to go from trials to maturity. And we're looking at James chapter 2, verses 1 to 4, as Naomi read for us a little bit earlier. But let me read it to us again from the New Living Translation, which says, Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. Let's step back and remember that James was writing here to Christians who were scattered all over Asia during the Roman Empire. The church was still small, but it was growing. Though followers of Jesus were definitely not in the majority. In fact, in many places, they were going through persecution, suffering for their faith, even to the point of death. And those who weren't executed risked losing their income, their families, because they were turning away from the Roman religion of worshipping the emperor or joining in many of the other religions around them at the time. And at times when people are suffering deeply, it's just not enough to say, they're there, it'll be okay. There's no point saying, don't worry, it'll never happen. when it has happened. But the early Christians expected to suffer. They'd seen or they'd heard about Jesus' terrible death on the cross, so they didn't have any illusions that the Christian life would be easy or lead to a comfortable life. So we need to take note of each time that James uses the word when in these verses. When you face trials of every kind, when your faith is tested. The use of when and not if makes it clear that we are to expect difficult and challenging times as we follow Christ. And that really flies in the face of the health and wealth gospel, which says believe in Jesus and your life will be sorted until kingdom come. The other thing to note is that there's no description of the types of trials or comparison. Later on in his letter, James does actually mention temptation. He talks about illness and problems with business. But he doesn't compare which ones are less serious, more serious. There's no code red, yellow, and green where some we are supposed to consider pure joy and others are milder trials and we're allowed to have a little grumble. It could sound like the worst pastoral advice you could give. I'm sorry you're having a hard time, but consider it pure joy. Or as one of my teachers used to say, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You might not be surprised to know that she was a PE teacher. But far from being the worst pastoral advice, James actually throws them a vital lifeline. You know what, guys? I know you're going to have challenges, problems, and loads of trouble. But when that happens, you need to regard it all as an opportunity for joy. Whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it pure joy. And there are 3 words in this passage which show us how it is possible. The first is the word consider. I'm sure we've all seen and heard countless messages online and elsewhere during lockdown about the power of positive thinking or how it helps to be an optimist. Try to maximize your time in lockdown. Be a glass half full person. Learn a new skill and by September you'll be fluent in another language. But James isn't just telling them to see the light at the end of the tunnel. This word consider isn't just about a change of perspective, putting your rose-tinted glasses on. It's more to do with reckoning, about giving things their proper value. For an atheist or an agnostic, anyone who believes that there is nothing beyond what we can see or touch or feel, suffering is a huge problem. If your life has no greater meaning, then all you can do is hide from suffering or try to increase your level of pleasure so that you can forget about your suffering, but you can't really get away from it. But James says it's not the same for us. And actually, the New Testament writers agree with him. We only have to look at Jesus, who endured the cross for our sakes, to know that in God's kingdom, trials of any kind can have a significance beyond what we can see. And this is what Paul meant when he says, as we live for Jesus, our present troubles won't last very long. Our light and momentary afflictions are winning for us a glory that outweighs them all. In 2 Corinthians 4:17. And that brings us to the second word, which is perseverance or endurance. Now, perseverance here is not a passive submission to circumstances, but it's a strong, active, challenging response, and it must have a focus. If I'd asked anyone in January to run 1,000 times round a Premier Lodge instead of doing the London Marathon, or to climb 2,394 stairs instead of Mount Kilimanjaro, or walk 100 times round their garden on a Zimmer frame, nobody would have agreed to do it. But since lockdown, of course, it's all changed. And of course, it doesn't matter who does it or where, because there's a new focus as the money raised goes to help save lives and support key workers in the NHS or all the charities that we know and love. Endurance is possible when we have a focus. The Bible contains some beautiful images about what perseverance in the life of faith in Jesus looks like. Psalm 1, of course, tells us about the tree planted by streams of running water, which never fails to bear fruit in and out of season. Or we have the image of Paul in Philippians 3 as an athlete training himself to run the race and win the prize for which he has been called. And Peter talks about the refining of our faith as being like the smelting of precious metals so that they will be pure and refined. But all this takes time. Endurance can only be built up with repeated testing. If you're a gardener at the moment, you might be thinking about planting out your seedlings because you know that you can't rush the process of planting out. And without sunlight and wind and rain, some plants fail to thrive. But that takes careful thinking and testing of the conditions around. And testing's hard, isn't it? I can't think of a single person I know who likes tests, let alone those words that we see in James, the testing of your faith. Someone I was studying the Bible with many years ago said to me, when I became a Christian, it was like I'd been given a free gift of new life. I knew I was a sinner. I knew I needed Jesus' death on the cross to give me a new life. But since I became a Christian, it feels so much harder. It feels as if I'm constantly having to do tests to prove that I'm a good Christian. And it's Jesus who's setting the tests. Some of us have this really wrong idea that God is like a heavenly headmaster or some kind of divine drill sergeant. And when we read these words, the testing of our faith, we imagine God setting us impossible challenges and leaving us to sink or swim. You may not think you feel like that, but sometimes when we go through suffering, we do think, why has God allowed this to happen? Is it because he wants me to prove my faith to him? I think it's important for us to realize that, as James says here, God is not the source of temptation, nor does he bring evil into our lives in order to torment us so that we can be better people. Instead, Peter says in 1 Peter 1 verse 5, through our faith, God is protecting us by his power until we receive that priceless inheritance of life with Jesus. Instead, it's Satan who seeks to destroy faith. And this was Job's experience. But God is the one who acts in kindness to redeem Job's life at the end. Jesus said to Peter, Satan has asked to dredge you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail, and then you may turn around and strengthen your brothers. Over the last few years, our own family has been through tough times that we could never have imagined. We've had bereavement and disability, chronic pain, surgery that's been scheduled and postponed and scheduled and postponed again. But the only reason we've come out standing on the other side, weak as we are, is because Jesus has proven his promise time and time again, never to leave us or forsake us. And his Holy Spirit, the Counselor, has never failed to strengthen and help us at the very times when we've been at our lowest. As an 8-year-old, I went through a swimming proficiency test, and the final part of the test was to jump off a 10-meter high diving board into the pool below. I'd done all the other parts with no problems, treading water, swimming at the bottom of the pool, but the diving board terrified me, and I refused to admit defeat. So for 3 weeks as I practiced for the test, I'd climb up the ladder, onto the diving board, look down at the pool below, and then just sit there. I was too scared to jump and too scared to climb down. But each week, my swimming coach would sit on a bench by the pool, coaxing me, assuring me that he was there, and encouraging me that I would be fine and safe. And on the last week, when I'd sat there for an hour until the sun had set, and this was way past his working hours, I finally took the plunge, jumped into the water, and got the reward. And he could have just walked away. But he knew the fears of a little girl, and he wanted to see me succeed. No matter what we go through, our Heavenly Father is present, reassuring us, watching over us, strengthening us. This isn't just an empty promise, but something firm that we can stake our lives on. As our faith is tested, what helps us to endure is not God's absence, but his constant presence, his loving kindness, even in times when we can barely feel he's there. And I'm so thankful for Lisa's testimony this morning, as we heard, because it rings so true. In the midst of illness and physical weakness, she found joy, pure joy, in knowing that Jesus was present with her. And just to remind you what she said earlier on, it was when she surrendered everything, even that desire to be healed, even the desire for God to fulfill all the promises that he'd made to her, that she found real joy just being in Jesus' presence and abiding in him. Because that's what James means when he says, when your endurance is complete, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. And so the final word in this verse that we want to look at is perfection or maturity. And this tells us that pain isn't the end of the story. Perfection isn't a very popular concept in our culture, is it? We like our flawed heroes. We want to identify with those who are lovable in their imperfection, admirable, yet vulnerable. Perhaps we think that being perfect and complete means being holier than thou, being some kind of spiritual goody two-shoes, always having the answers, always knowing which Bible verse applies when. It sounds a bit icky to me. But if the testing of our faith is meant to draw us closer to Jesus, then let me suggest that perfect Christ-likeness is not self-centered. It's not arrogant. It's not based on any kind of external perfection, but instead it's God-focused. It's other-centered. It's responding to others with perfect humility and patience. It's about having perfect peace in the most horrendous, pressured situations. It's about knowing that God has a perfect plan for us, even when times are challenging. It's being so attuned to God's Spirit, having his priorities, so that his understanding and grace overflow into our daily lives and into the lives around us. We know that pain is not the end of the story, because in verse 12, James says, God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterward, they will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. And I love the words of Peter in his first epistle in chapter 1, which says, though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy, for you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Now, if you don't know Jesus, you may be sitting here thinking this morning, but it is all meaningless. Life is tough, and for what? And perhaps you need to reconsider the reality of a God who loves you, who longs to help you in the present circumstances to find purpose and meaning in your life. And if so, and you would like to find out more, please stay on and join in the social time at the end, and someone will be really happy to talk to you more about what it means to know joy in difficulty. But for those of us who know and love Jesus today, I wonder what changes we might need to make to look at this time and indeed any other trial we might face in the future and consider it pure joy, whether at work or at home. Are your difficulties and problems driving you towards Jesus, towards knowing his word and promises in the Bible better? And what might you need to surrender, as Lisa had to do, so that you can rest in Jesus' presence? We're going to end the service with the song Waymaker, which reminds us that Jesus is the Waymaker, the miracle worker, the promise keeper, the light in the darkness. And my prayer is that he may be that and so much more to you and I as we go into the coming week. Amen.